One of the initial steps of the military PsyOp program is directed toward the hostland military establishment itself. Since the military represents the government to the populace, their actions and attitudes can do much to create a favorable image of that government in the minds of the people. A soldier's attitude goes a long way toward implementing an effective military PsyOp program. Among the support elements needed are the light mobile printing team with its printing and editorial shelters. Also needed is a radio team to support existing radio stations, particularly in the back country. An audiovisual vehicle will help to increase the effectiveness of face-to-face communications. And a loudspeaker team will support tactical operations.
Well, there we go. That is the intro to the PsyOp Recovery Program. Now, this is a show that we were doing, I think, about 2 or 3 years ago. I'm going to say 3 years ago. Now we're in 18. I think that was more like 5 years ago. My goodness, time flies. Anyway, what we've got now is we have Dr. Judy on the line. And today we're going to be talking a little bit about her court case, because a lot of people don't realize that, in fact, Dr. Judy Wood has launched a court case against NIST and, well, the subcontractors.
No, the contractors
against the subcontractors, the contractors that are involved with 9/11. Okay, let me hand it over to you because, of course, I didn't quite get that right. So I'll let you clear that up.
You can't sue the government, but you can sue contractors of the government. And the I realize I have a fan going here. Let's see if I can kill that. The NIST report. Well, it was mandated by Congress that they're to determine why and how the towers, quote, collapsed. And the report came out, I forgot the exact title, but something like Final Report of the Collapse of the Towers. So that they're assuming what the answer was before they started. But the contractors, and there's a list, I think, of 23 or something like that we had, that you can go down the list of what each one did and so forth. So when I wrote my request for corrections to NIST, that was my whistleblowing act. And so, obviously was the first whistleblower, still the only one about this, and that qualified me to file a QTAM case or whistleblower case.
Yeah, can you explain that a little bit more, because a lot of people won't understand what that is, although you can find it on the website.
Yeah, and also I think on Wikipedia it's listed there, but it's a whistleblower case. So if you know that they did some hanky business or whatever, there's some dodgy stuff to get paid, and you bet they wouldn't have been paid if they said what really happened. So they have some bogus stuff, and so I listed various things from each company with my request for corrections to NIST, which was my act of whistleblowing. And NIST agreed. They wrote me back saying, "Oh, we didn't know that." So, in other words, I was the first one because they said we didn't know that, and it was a conflict of interest and whatnot. And it was brilliance of the lawyer who was working with me on this case of figuring out that was one loophole that hadn't been closed by the crew. What I mean by the crew is, some people call it the powers that be. It's just the crew, whoever's doing, the they behind the scenes, and they hadn't covered that loophole. That it was an avenue. Now with the Pentagon, the reason why I never really concentrate a lot on the Pentagon, I have things to say about it, but there was no NIST report for the Pentagon, but the NIST report, being a government document. And then there's contractors who worked on that report and the analysis and so forth. That gave us the avenue. And but few folks really realized, I think, why, about the request for correction. The thermite people after that decided they didn't want to miss out on looking like they weren't doing anything, and so they filed a request for correction and copied some of my stuff, but they didn't really blow the whistle on anything, and they didn't mention anything about thermite evidence. So there was no whistleblowing, but they didn't realize that's why I had done it. And by the time they were filing, some request for correction issue, I had already filed the Ketam case. But it has to be filed under seal, which means nobody knows about it until they decide to unseal it. And yeah, I guess when they unsealed it, so I filed it in April 2007, and it was September 12th, 2007 when they unsealed it. Isn't that an interesting date?
That
The
is
day
an
after
interesting date.
yeah.
Yes, very
Yep.
coincidental.
Yep. And they decided they weren't going to, it gives also the government the option to run with it or just turn it back to the individual. Uh, that it depends on the popularity of the case, I think, is how it goes. But it's interesting, and so many people, the truther gang, like to say, well, she doesn't care who did it. She doesn't know anything about who did it. Well, yeah, I've done more than anybody. If this case had gone forward, we'd have under oath those who know who did it, or very likely, would have known. Let's see, top of the list. I'm doing this all from memory. Is Applied Research Associates. They're in charge of a lot of interesting things, but they're manufacturers and developers of energy weapons. Isn't that interesting?
Yes.
And
There are no
and
coincidences it's here.
And also, not only that, so they would be able to recognize what technology was used, because that's their area of expertise. The other interesting thing is they had at the time, and probably still have, a contract with the U.S. government to know everything about any weapon of mass destruction that is being developed or has been developed anywhere. So not only do they know what technology, they very likely know whose technology.
Right. So it's not as though people don't know who did this, and including the people that were involved in this case.
Well, they just know who owns. They would easily know who owns that technology because it's different style from different ones, but that's their what they're hired to do. So the fact that they were having what is it called, willful negligence or willful blindness. They're pretending they have blindfolds on, just ignored that fact. So they are in a position to have known, or should have known, a whole lot of stuff, and instead they put forth this bogus thing. They did much of the models, like for instance, Building 7. They modeled it, and they did a very good job modeling it. They modeled dustification.
Mm-hmm.
They had the entire innards of the building turned to dust, and then the outer shell looks like it drops to the ground. There wasn't a building inside by that point. It was, you can see by all the dust poofing out of it in all directions, and it didn't go thud on the ground.
Right.
So to have modeled that, it takes knowledge of what happened.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, how did the building just miraculously turn to dust and all the interior? And they again are manufacturers and developers of energy weapons. So
Mm-hmm.
you can see it goes all the way through, and also is in the NIST report about the whisper quiet demise of the buildings. With the Building 7, you had people a block or two away. Is various videos, like there's this woman with her baby and getting interviewed, and you can see in the background the building going down, and then the reporter figures it out and tells, "Oh, watch out for your baby," and they have no idea there's this dust cloud rolling towards them. They have no idea this building just went poof.
Mm-hmm.
Another one is the Barbara Crowley one. I think Andrew Johnson has it on his channel. Check the evidence.
Mm-hmm.
um, on YouTube, and
That's
where Barbara.
sorry.
What?
There is a website as well. It's checktheevidence.com, I believe.
Right, and I think his YouTube channel is Check the Evidence, but either one he had to be able to find the Barbara Crowley one. Where here's this. I don't know if she's a doctor or emergency medical technician. She's in scrubs and is being interviewed, and uh, the building's behind her, so she doesn't see it. And they're interviewing her about, oh, what do you need? Well, we need this, we need that, we need food for these people, and just worried about managing the rescue workers. And then suddenly the spectators there go, some big gasp. And in one of the recordings, you can also hear the cameraman going, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, whoa!" But anyway, Barbara Crowley goes, what happened? And she has no idea that something's going on, except the people around her are gasping. They're just like, "Whoa!" And what's happening? What's happening? She has no clue that this building is dropping down behind her. So I think that's pretty good evidence that there's no, loud bang, 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 and a thud on the ground. These people had no concept of that, and people a couple of blocks away, like they tell her it was building 7. She goes, "No, that ain't what," huh? What? She's totally unaware of that. She was thinking it went down earlier because something. She was thinking of towers 1 and 2. But anyway, yeah, the silent demise, or whisper quiet, I call it. The lack of significant sound does not agree with bombs in the building or gravity collapse or anything of that sort, or nukes, or there's something else going on that quietly dustified the buildings. And you could see the inside of Building 7 dustified all day long, and then the outer shell goes to the ground. But anyway, they separated the reports. 7 went in a separate report from 1 and 2. And when the 1 and 2 report came out, I focused on just that stuff. But before the 7 report came out, I put in my request for corrections on that one early, so I licked it early. Um, but anyway, the 1 and 2, the silent demise of those buildings was, you know, wait, so they have all this information in the report, but they didn't know what to think of it, so they ignored it, or that's how they presented it. And it doesn't make sense for somebody who knows how to model stuff. And I also, in my documents I submitted to NIST, is like, here's ARA's, Applied Research Associates is the name. Here's their testing site, somewhere in the desert or whatnot, where they build concrete structures, and then they blow them up to see what happens. And they know that it blows into chunks, big chunks, little chunks, in between size chunks. It doesn't turn into powder in midair. So they have an expertise that, they know that. They know it doesn't powderize the building. And they have a cement mixing factory there. And they test how bombs affect different kinds of structures in their test facilities. Another interesting thing that they're researching, it's on their website, I think they took it down right after I started talking about it, is tornadoes and hurricanes, how to weaponize them. Isn't that interesting? Yeah.
So many coincidences. I'm
So
having
that
a hard time with that word. Coincidences is
Yeah, it's
a, a
you know
plethora of coincidence, I'm going to
they
say.
knew or should have known. That term comes up quite a lot, and willful blindness comes up a lot. And then we have, let's see, SAIC, that's Science Applications International Corporation. They may have changed their name a few times since, when they soiled one name, they changed to another one. They're and as well as ARA, they're also into designing PsyOps.
Hmm.
Yeah, they claimed that SAIC was just entering data, typing up the report.
Right. Can you tell me a little bit more about what you mean by design psyops? I have an inkling, but I
Oh,
think I need a little bit.
planning it, and uh, yeah, they have an expertise in psyops.
Okay. As it sounds.
Um, Yeah, like there's something that they had a sub company so they could break it loose if there was a problem, and they wouldn't be attached to them. That was dropping leaflets, I think in Iraq or
Mm-hmm.
was it Iran? Propaganda leaflets,
Okay.
and they had to be careful not to drop in the U.S. because that would violate the Smith-Mundt Act at that time. uh, and they got in trouble for putting out propaganda, and they said they cut that company loose, and they got another one, yeah, another name. It's the same thing as these going out of business furniture places,
Mm-hmm.
and clearance sale, going out of business sale, like you're going to get deals, and then the next day they open the same business reopens under a different name.
Right.
So
Yeah.
you thought you were getting a deal, right? So it's that type of deal. And SAIC had people on the site on the day of 9/11 and uh, immediately after, and they monitored the site. They're in charge of security for the site all during the cleanup. So you
Mm-hmm.
bet they know where those dirt trucks were coming and going from.
Yes. The dirt trucks are really fascinating to me. All these other peripheral things to
The
the
dirt
actual
comes
buildings
in, the
coming
dirt
down.
goes out.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Maybe you could
Yeah, they
explain that a
truck
little
it
bit.
in. Yeah, they truck in fresh loads of dirt and dump them, stir them around, and a little bit later, uh, then they go to this other area. And they take haul that dirt back out. And dirt is used for cleaning up chemical spills.
Mm-hmm. And
Uh, and so if you have some toxic stuff, put dirt all over it and scoop it up. It's kind of like changing diapers. There was some outgassing of this stuff or an ongoing reaction. You could see the ground fuming. That's what I called it. It's a generic term. But you
mm-hmm.
see this hazy stuff coming off the ground, right? It's like steam rising off of a manure pit. You see this cloud. It wasn't hot, but that was why they had this story about hot ground zero,
Mm-hmm.
because then people weren't asking questions as to what that fuming was all about. But you have workers walking right across it, and they're not getting cooked to death. You have equipment that would seize up if it was hot, and that didn't happen. No reports of dogs with burned feet, the cadaver dogs, or the
Yeah.
search and rescue dogs that became cadaver dogs. They look for bodies after they realize there's no live people in there. They didn't have any reports of burned feet.
Hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, but there's a story of these, really hot fires or hot whatever, and that gave people an answer, so they quit asking questions.
Right. Isn't that funny how that works? As soon as you give some sort of answer, then people are satisfied, and they'll start repeating that uh, as though
My
it's
favorite one.
true. No, what is it?
My favorite answer that in a perfect example of how that works is George Stephanopoulos.
Mm-hmm.
Peter Jennings in the studio asked George Stephanopoulos at the site, George, Jackie Jett and several others have been asking, where'd all the rubble go? And then George answers, well, Peter, I've been asking folks that. One volunteer, Robert Kurlinski, explained it all fell down into the ground, was pulverized, evaporated.
Hmm.
So he didn't stop to, does that make any sense? He just repeated it. It was an
Mm-hmm.
answer. Now he had an answer and he could move on.
And do you think that was spontaneous at that particular moment, or was he had he talked
I
about
think
it
he could have,
before?
I think he could have heard someone say that, and then
Mm-hmm.
he just repeated it without stopping and saying, that makes no sense. Because at that point, people just want answers, and they get an
Right.
answer and they run with it. And that's how humans are.
Yeah, these
It
guys
just
really
like,
get it. I think that's why I like the idea that we're going back to the PsyOp recovery, because this is really teaching people in the audience how things work and how we get kind of trained into these ways of thinking, and then they can run with it. So it's not as though they don't know, the crew, as you call them, don't understand how our minds process information.
the opposite is, it's and people, aren't going to be thinking outside the box in general. They're going to be looking for an answer inside the box, and as soon as somebody gives them an answer, fine, they run with it. They don't stop to think. That's absurd.
Yeah, I've noticed that lately with a lot of the stuff. People will just they feel like they want to be on the inside. They want to have the inside scoop. And so they hear something that is clearly presented as a PsyOp, and they kind
They
of
run
glom
with it.
onto that. And they can't shake it because they're pretty convinced that they're on the inside and everybody else
Yep.
has, they're mistaken. But when we work with evidence, as you do, then it becomes a whole different framework. And I think that's what we're trying to do here. One of the reasons that I wanted to go over this information from your case is that there's some case out there that's going around the internet where there's a suggestion that they're going to be able to bring these folks, and they do name them, to justice. Now, the problem with that is they don't even name what the problem is.
What are they going to charge them with?
Yeah, exactly. They don't present the problem before presenting the perpetrators. And I find that interesting because if we put that in any other realm, like sexual abuse, we could just put anybody out there, our neighbor, anybody we don't like, and just say,
the Casey Anthony case is just like that. is that they decide to charge her. She looks guilty, so therefore we're charge her. Okay, charge her with what? What did she do? She very well may have had something to do with what happened to her child, but there's no evidence. They did not solve the case first. They just said, let's get her. She looks guilty, so let's go get her. They had no evidence of what she did. So what crime are you going to charge her with? Premeditated murder or accidental murder? Negligence? What is it? You have to figure out what she did first.
Madeline says, after traumatic events, people want to feel safe, so comfortable answers come with the territory, for lack of a better phrase, which I think is another way of saying what you're saying. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, they just want an answer. They don't screen the answer. They just have an answer and they run with it. Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm. Now, this is interesting because this tends to be what happens when we have a chat going, and I want to keep people in the loop and feel like they're having their questions addressed. Nick Wilkinson says, I heard that the support beams were all sent off to Asia and melted down by an Israeli contractor. The support beams of the towers were not able to be examined by forensic experts. Now, this is an example of what I would call a talking point.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
so
give somebody an answer so they run with it. Well, the thing is, the material was missing before the dust cleared. In other words, before noon on 9/11. Before, once the dust cleared, you could look around the site and see there wasn't much stuff there, and everything was at ground level. The material was already gone. So how could it be shipped off to China or wherever they claim it got sent to? How could they have organized, shipping vessels to clear out the site within an hour of the demise of the buildings? Just before they even went looking for bodies, you're telling me they hauled off, material that, over a ton of what do you call it, 1,000,000 tons of material?
How many million was it? Was it?
Well, it was 500,000 tons for each building.
Right. So just
it's
over
over
1.2. Yeah,
for the whole site, it's like 1.3 million tons.
Just so folks know what we're talking about here.
And it took how long to haul that material in to build the buildings? How could they haul it out in 30 minutes?
Yeah. It's just common sense. It's critical thinking. This is why talking points never work with this sort of thing, because you have to use your brain power. You have to have something click in. And for some of us, it's just a response that doesn't make sense, like a spidey senses, if you want to call it that. And for some like you that are, well, you have both, but you're also an engineer. So some things just don't make sense.
Yeah, the trick is to not be in a hurry to jump to an answer. And be satisfied with just knowing how much it is that you really know. And without having to just jump to an answer because you want an answer so badly, the temptation is to jump to an answer. But some things are not knowable, but some things are. So that's why I like to say, know what it is that you know,
okay.
and know that everything else you don't know.
Well, Nick, another question. So, are you suggesting the WC was dematerialized? And there are people that are very new to this information. So, clearly he hasn't read the book, and that's fine because that's why we're here to help answer questions. But he does say
I'm not
amazing.
suggesting.
He says
I'm not
amazing.
suggesting. I'm stating that that's probably the most obvious thing, is that and you start looking at the pictures, like the video they're showing us on 9/11 of this building frothing up into dust in midair. You look at a steel beam flying through the air, and that beam never hits the ground as a solid object. It's turned to dust before it gets there.
Mm-hmm.
And which is why there's a lack of seismic. You can confirm it in all sorts of other ways too, but it's like an Alka-Seltzer tablet going through the air.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Instead of and what I've been able to see is, instead of the atoms being attracted to each other, they're repelling each other. And that's why it or appears to froth up into dust.
Mm-hmm.
And then it doesn't go thud on the ground, so that's why there's a lack of seismic signal.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot of things that you can find out in the book, and that is really essential, not just to hear bits and pieces like this particular show, but I have a link in the description. You can go to Amazon and get a copy of the book. It's not that Dr. Judy is making any money on this book. It's like a textbook. It's unbelievably large. And for any of you that have gone to university, you know that textbooks like this would probably be more like $200. But I'm just saying
or
that
$300
yeah, exactly.
A lot.
It costs probably more to produce and ship than you're paying for it. But the point is that you need to go through the entire thing just like you would with a case, and that's a court case, which is why I think it's important to see how a court case is put together. In the case of this one, it was put together by Dr. Judy herself and her lawyer, and you put it together based on the evidence, and the evidence is there for those that have eyes to see.
For example, let's go to a court show of somebody killed somebody. Well, they how did they kill him? Well, you got to produce the murder weapon or pretty good evidence around that. But here's the gun, and here's the bullet that goes through that gun. It has this kind of scar material on it, and by golly, the body had this bullet in it with the same scar thing, and the guy's fingerprints is on the gun, and there's a whole lot of details I didn't really appreciate so much before as to why it was so important, because you don't want to leave any stone unturned, because there's no other interpretation. You got to eliminate every other interpretation and have it that guy over there in the accused chair, that there's here's his fingerprints, he was at the site, and the test showed that his hand fired a gun. And that's his gun, and here's where he purchased it from. Here's his fingerprints on the gun. Here's the characteristic of the bullet from that gun, and it matches what's in the victim. All these details matter.
Can I give people an example of something that you told me early on? Was you look out your window. I'm pretty sure that I'm just recapping this, but you look out your window and you see somebody lying in the middle of the road. And a lot of us might jump to the conclusion that this person had been run over by a vehicle. But it's not till you go down and take a look and you see that there's a bullet hole there. And then you start looking at the body.
Or find poison in it. Or
I'm using as an example of how we can jump to conclusions quite easily because the person's on the road and our mind automatically goes to traffic accident. But it's not until we start, and it could have been a vehicle as well, but was it before or after? Did they dump them out of the cars they were going by, and they had they been already shot or stabbed or whatever? Because there are things about the body that happen that we can determine when they died. It wasn't necessarily at the point of impact on the road. So I think that was a really good illustration to me of how our minds jump to conclusions rather than being patient about going down and doing the necessary forensic inspection, whatever you want to call it,
before
we form opinions.
You heard Right, you heard a car tire squeal and a thud, like of a car hitting somebody. But you go out there and the body's ice cold, like it's been dead for 24 hours or more. So the car didn't kill the person, then and there.
I do have another question here. Does Dr. Judy know if anyone has inquired if there are any CCTV footage of people, vehicles that were reportedly physically moved large distances by the cool dust cloud after the collapse?
Well, some cars that were flipped over. That I don't know what was moved. It wasn't necessarily moved by the dust cloud. There's something that caused the cars to, maybe levitate and flip over, but they were flipped over. But there's no evidence of the dust cloud doing it. There's also evidence of cars that were not moved by the dust clouds, like the uh, Embassy Suites parking lot. I call it the toasted car lot. That it's this huge parking lot, and it's full of unburned paper, a sea of unburned paper between the buildings and the parking lot, and then also covering the parking lot. So, why would these cars suddenly, appear to go into spontaneous combustion? Notice I say appear. We don't know, what the deal was with them, but without any unburned paper catching fire. So you don't have to be able to jump to a conclusion on that. You just know that these are the facts. And so it's not like fire ran from the building over to the cars and caught them on fire. You can eliminate that because you'd have burned paper. But there were vehicles that were turned upside down. Why? We don't know. Were they levitated? I don't think the air flipped them over because they're just upside down but parked in the right place. They're just wrong orientation. Tires are up in the air rather than, headed towards the ground.
For those
And there's
that,
also
sorry.
a guy who, an emergency medical guy who okay, Tower 2 is starting to come apart, and so he's making a run for it, and he dives underneath the emergency services vehicle. And then everything went black, and he assumed that he was a goner and buried under a pile of stuff. But then the dust cleared, he looked up and saw blue sky. Where's the vehicle? He had no idea when the vehicle, when it rolled off him, was lifted up, or what happened. And everything was all black because the dust went up and blocked out all sunlight. But he has no recollection of when that vehicle left, but he dove under the vehicle for safety. But then the vehicle wasn't there. When the dust cleared, it's weird things like that. So it didn't. He didn't describe a tornado type force, blowing the vehicle off. I mean, he doesn't know if it rolled off him, if it got lifted up and carried away. Has no idea.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, there's a lot of things about vehicles that people don't seem to talk about very much. That's another one. It's not only what we do talk about, the talking points, but it's what's left out of the narrative that's quite interesting as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's it's some interesting things. So with my Ketam case, in order to go forward with the case, you have to show fraud was involved, and that you were the first whistleblower. Well, NIST, when they replied to my request for correction, they acknowledged there was fraud involved, and they acknowledged that I was the first one. So we should be having a court case now. Mm-hmm. But the judge dismissed it, saying he wasn't going to hear a case about who shot JFK or what landed on the moon. Excuse me, sir, did you read the case? It's not about those things. Mm-hmm. He also combined my case with two others. One was Morgan Reynolds talking about airplanes, or lack of.
Mm-hmm. Sorry, I'm just turning this down. She's showing a couple of the images, but I've got some sound here. Go ahead.
Okay, in the other case, it was somebody who was promoting the idea of bombs in the building. Mm-hmm. Well, neither of those have anything to do with my case, but yet he dismissed. He combined them, so he dismissed them, saying something about airplanes and something about bombs in the building, but it had nothing to do with my case. Mm-hmm. So he did not dismiss my case based on what my case was about. So they went to the Court of Appeals, and Morgan didn't appeal his case, so they couldn't mix it in. Mm-hmm. They couldn't play that game the second time. It was just my case, and those judges actually stated in the footnote of their written decision that they acknowledged that the law applied to my case, but they're ignoring the law in order to dismiss the case.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that law was FERA, Fraud Enforcement Recovery Act.
Mm-hmm.
And that was put in place. Remember the 2008 bailouts? They wanted to make sure the whistleblower could come forward with such a case. They wanted accountability. And KTAM cases had notoriously been dismissed based on bogus stuff, like you have to prove, that not what Congress intended when they made the law, but what the judges were putting in place in order to be able to let people off the hook. You have to say what thought they were thinking when they're and where they're standing, down to a nanometer, where they were standing, and where the hour hand was on the clock, and where the minute hand was, and exactly what they were thinking to show premeditation. The requirements that become absurd. And so to make sure that there would be accountability for the bailouts, they brought up this Fraud Enforcement Recovery Act that said, restated what the law was supposed to be. It wasn't a new law. It was, just emphasized. And then the judges decided they were going to ignore that and go back to, the nonsense stuff. So they're ignoring the FERA ruling and wanted to, base it on something. Well, it really wasn't anything they based it on. It, it was just, roundabout gobbledygook. Um, basically you have to show premeditation where the hour hand is, and where the second hand is, and exactly where they're standing and at what day, and to have premeditated thought. It becomes ridiculous. There's no question there was fraud involved.
Now, why aren't those same standards applied to everything else? Why don't they just take the evidence in another court case and say, okay, let's take a look at the evidence and weigh that and
Well,
see
they never
if
looked at the evidence. They never
well,
looked at the evidence.
this is the germane point I think that you're trying to make, is that even the case was treated differently than they would normally in a regular court case.
Right, and so here we have the judges in their written decision stating that they're ignoring the law in order to dismiss the case, and then so we appealed to the Supreme Court. It's sort of a new process. It's not the same court. You have to streamline it, no more than 25 pages, and that has to include all the various lawyers' names and addresses and all that gobbledygook in there. And so it's not very many pages of material, but the point is that the lower court had dismissed the case by ignoring the law and had acknowledged that. And now, I forget what it changed in the late 80s, I think, that the Supreme Court no longer had to hear cases unless they felt like it. And they didn't have to even say why they didn't feel like it. And they just, step around it. Of course, that's what they did. So they didn't have a problem with the fact that the lower court ignored the law in order to dismiss the case. Isn't that precedent setting?
I guess
Not
that was the
anymore.
problem. That was really their concern, I think, was that not only was that the information going to come out, but it was also precedent setting.
Yeah, that you would ignore the law to dismiss the case, but that's now okay to do. So that was precedent setting in itself. But the Supreme Court didn't have to say why they didn't feel like it. But you have to stop and think. If anyone along,
I find it amusing that you say that they didn't feel like it. We don't feel like looking at the law today. We've had enough of that sort of thing.
That's literally it. They don't have to have any justification. No justification whatsoever. And they just, they just don't feel like it. Yep. And that changed in the late 80s, I think. Before then, they had to at least hear the case and decide whether they're going to dismiss it or accept it. But now they don't even have to say why, or and they just decide they didn't want to hear the case. They didn't want to mess with that one. But it gets you to stop and think. What are the implications of this? If any of these judges had agreed to hear the case, do you think they would be justified on the way home from work? It helps you realize this case is too big to put in a court system. And let's say you have 12 jury members, You think those people are ever going to survive it? Yeah, once you start thinking about those implications, yeah, there's no witness protection program big enough for anybody.
Well, in case people don't really understand the implications of the technology itself, and we're not labeling it as anything, whether it's nukes, bombs, whatever, it's just a technology that we haven't seen before, or at least I'm going to say
Well,
that.
that
So,
right there, it defines it as not being regular bombs,
right. Okay.
and
So,
not nukes.
as
but
part of,
but let me
sorry,
simplify it.
go
That
ahead.
the buildings mostly turn to dust in midair. You know, as I said, actually in the Supreme Court case, to condense my story, the buildings didn't burn up, nor did they slam to the ground. They mostly turned to dust in midair. Okay, once we understand that, that's evidence right there that a technology exists that can do that. It can do what was done because it happened. You can name it Gizmo X or Y or Z, whatever. You can call it whatever you want to call it, but it's a technology that exists that can do what was done. It can do other things too. You know, it can transmute material. There's evidence shown that it could do that. It could do a whole host of things. So once it's understood that this technology exists, well, we could use it to provide free, clean energy to the planet. You know, this is a wide variety of things, like Fukushima. It's only the way it is because somebody wants it that way. You could clean it up because you can transmute elements. Chernobyl you could clean up. But if you did clean it up, isn't that pretty much an admission that this technology exists?
That is the issue here. So when people are talking about, in these sort of glib terms, taking people to court, I have to reiterate this, because if you hear this going around the internet, you have to really question it, because first of all, go back to your basic law 101. Maybe you haven't taken law, but you can certainly look at it and find out that you have to have evidence of the thing
Probable
happening.
cause.
And what happened? What happened in the first place? Buildings were what, and
Yeah, but what happened to the buildings? Did they fall down, go boom? Did they turn to dust in midair? Yeah.
right. And actually, there's some images that are on the screen right now that you can see from above. And now I'm trying to remember, was this two or no? This was actually I think around the 20th or something of
Yeah,
September. But
it was an air shot of or aerial view of it, a flyover from a helicopter or something. And you look and there's it was a pretty much a surgical takeout of any building that had a WTC prefix and nothing else, except for the little church. But it's it's rather incredible, and to realize it all ended up at about ground level, not below ground. People
this
could escape going out to the mall underground.
Well, that was a little bit earlier. We saw the underground area and how it was intact. There was still, as you say, there was an
Some places,
echo
yeah.
down there, which means if you have an echo, that means it's an open space that doesn't have debris in it.
Well,
These
that
are all
was
just
parking
logical
garages.
things. Now,
Yeah.
I have quite a few people that are asking a variety of different questions, and so it's going to be interesting to see. I don't want to go off in too many different directions. We are trying to focus on the case today, but I think for those that are brand new to the conversation, I'm not going to address certain things, like somebody was asking you if you get followed around by BMWs with dark tinted windows. Well, you've had your experiences with all of that, and we can talk about that another day.
Yeah. That's not that is like a more of a personal story. It has nothing to do with the evidence. If I've been threatened, therefore the evidence I'm presenting is true. It's illogical. So what happened to me is a separate thing. I mean, I've paid the price and then some, um, for what I'm doing. But my interest is in talking about the evidence of what happened, and talk about the evidence of what happened is the only way out of this. That instead of the he said, she said, traumatic stories. Um, but you look at what happened on the TV set, on 9/11, you saw this building dustifying. If enough people stopped and plugged up their ears and didn't hear oh, that's a collapse. Oh, okay, that's what a collapse looks like. And they stopped thinking. Instead, if they didn't hear that and they look at the TV set and say, what the heck is going on with that building? I've never seen anything like that before. That's what we need. And this was demonstrated in front of the whole planet. And if people could just see what really is going on, and it was right in front of them, instead of being psyopted, that would be the most powerful thing that could occur.
Again, this is the purpose of the show that we're doing. It's called PsyOp Recovery for a purpose. There's a part of us that is completely psyoped, whether it's the schools that we went to or the television that we've been watching. That doesn't mean to say these things are good, bad, or indifferent. It just is a fact. It surrounds us all the
If it's
time.
not on the TV, therefore it's not important. That's an assumption that people make.
Yeah.
And the TV wouldn't lie to us.
That's why it's great that we're hearing about fake news, I suppose, because for lack of a better word, we've been kind of sucked in by fake world.
Right. And for what I've been through, and I, of course, had learned about the hard way. And I was naive. I went through school looking at straightforward stuff of what is and what isn't, not trying to manipulate and argue with people about things. And then, the truthers come along, and it's all this psyop story that they're throwing out there. Oh, she lies about this. She says, and it confuses people. And so that they don't hear what I'm saying. And it's very useful for covering that up. Now I hear the current stuff going on, and I've been there, done that. Know what that's like. Of course, my favorite one is the Roy Moore thing about somebody coming out of the woodwork after 40 years to accuse Roy Moore of something, and then they go back into the woodwork and nobody hears about him again after this special election. And how easy it's been to manipulate people with where's the evidence, where's more, like the deal with the yearbook, and it turns out that wasn't Roy Moore's signature. It was the girl even later confessed that she wrote that stuff in her yearbook. But there's so easily people are persuaded by storytelling, and we all are. The first impressions stick. So if somebody hears the false accusations first, they are given priority. Like with my work, when I first started talking about the evidence, Stephen Jones immediately had a conference where he talked about, she says these beams, ray beams from outer space, and he's holding his hand like it's difficult to hold his hand that way, so therefore it couldn't have happened. It's a subliminal kind of thing. And then space beams, and it's where he first inserted that term. And it's before I ever talked on a radio show about this stuff. And so already people were at this mindset. Judy Wood talks about ray beams from outer space by space aliens, and isn't that stupid? Ha ha ha. So nobody's going to look at the work I'm presenting. And how effective that is. And some people, it took 5 years or 10 years to finally realize that they've been had by the truthers. Or the truther roundup. I call it a collection agency. It collects people to put them into cul-de-sacs so they don't think. And at a gross scale, that's what they do to the public through the TV set. Is they get you thinking about the wrong thing, so you can't solve the right problem. Don't look here, look over here. Oh, look over there. And in a way, this business of we're having a court case about who might have done it. What's it? And so don't look at the evidence. Look over here at the sideshow.
Yes.
And it's so easy to run psyops. It's so easy.
And it's been done for generations. And, when we look at ancient Rome or any of these things, it's not as though it's a new technology or an understanding of human nature. It's all of us have had it done to us to some extent or another, whether it's Santa Claus or the Tooth Fairy or
what's about the story about the Trojan horse? Yeah, I think they put a bunch of soldiers inside this horse, and the good guys would open up the gates, and they actually hauled in a whole bunch of the troops of the bad guys hidden in the horse. You remember that story?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's and where that phrase came from, but yeah, psyops has been around for quite a while. But
Yes. Not a
people are
new thing.
assuming that, right, and with the Trojan horse, they're assuming that it's a peace offering or gift or something, and without being because you don't want to be skeptical. I mean, you have a negative attitude. So does that also is used to coerce people into agreeing with something that they are skeptical about?
There's that side, and then there's the insider track. People that feel like they've got the inside evidence. I think that's the QAnon thing right now. It's just sucked people down that road. I'm going to be doing a show about that later on today, just on my
And it
own.
gets them to ignore the evidence of what happened.
And who who's behind this? I guess we don't have to know who exactly, but we can understand that there are, as you call it, the crew, which I love.
Yep.
Uh,
Yeah, you just call it the crew, and then you're done with it. You don't have to define them because defining them, like you say this person or that person, you'd be dead before you could talk, you could say it out loud.
mhm.
Or be opted out of it. You just know that there's some gang of folks somewhere orchestrated something. And you just call them the crew, and then there you can have somebody you can have a black box, so to speak, to blame it on. But then what did they do? And that's what is the most important thing. And if you start with the witch hunt, I think these guys over here are guilty. I think they're guilty. And people usually name Cheney and a few others, a handful of others. Then people are focusing on, oh yeah, that guy, point, get. Yeah, okay, now what do they do? Well, let me go find something. It's the classic witch hunt. And
Mhm.
if you start out with that direction, you have an agenda of proving that that person did something. And so then you go out and look for evidence that makes that person guilty instead of evidence of what really happened. And there's probably paper trails of stuff that you could, nonsense stuff that you can put out there. Like even, the thermite story. Anybody who's a true scientist would laugh that off. But when somebody was first looking for, an answer outside of the official story, they would easily get sucked into that.
Well, they also
And
get sucked into other things. Like somebody has just posted something about loose change, end game, that sort of thing. But those again are distractions, and they are part of the
mhm,
psyop from my
a
perspective. That
cul-de-sac.
it's a
Yeah, they're a
cul-de-sac.
cul-de-sac. Yeah, and
Door
the
number two, like door number
eh,
two, door number three.
right. Is I've often said, if you don't like the official story, the lie behind door number one, oh, we'll show you door number two. If you don't like the lie behind door number two, we'll show you door number three. And
Mm-hmm.
anything keeps people occupied in looking behind those doors, so they don't turn around and look at the wide open field of evidence right behind them,
Right.
because they're busy getting led to think about needing to go in those doors. And that's the biggest thing about it. Whenever I feel like I'm being led somewhere, ooh, you dig your heels in, because okay, here's, I guess, an example. Let's go to a used car lot or even a new car lot. You have the salesman come up on you. He's telling you whatever he needs to tell you to get you to buy the car.
Yep.
And so it's not necessarily the truth. It's just whatever he needs to close the deal. I guess a used car lot's the best example, because, oh yeah, this engine runs real well and it's never had a problem in its life. How do you know?
Mm-hmm.
And it's you start sensing that. You go, wait a minute.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was as a side story here, something my brother did with his oldest boy, just to show him something. They went to a car lot and pretend they're going to buy a car, and then just to observe what happened. And they put him in a room, in this uncomfortable room. It's too hot or too cold, so you want to go ahead and sign the papers so you can get out of there, get warmed back up or cooled off or whatever the case is. And there's various tricks they use. They're now a little bit slicker about it, but it used to be like in the 60s and 70s. They'd have the like 110 degrees in the room, so you wanted to sign and get out of there.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just the various game playing that goes on and that type of thing. And so whenever you sense that you're being coerced and that somebody's trying to manipulate you into a decision, that's the time to run. So you know that what decision is your decision, not somebody else's desire for your decision.
Right. Well, it's a shortcut to go and watch a YouTube video somewhere and have somebody sort of give a
Tell you your
synopsis of what they
opinion.
think. And then you take that in and it sounds pretty good. And it's not the mainstream narrative. So, of course, you think, again, that you have the inside track now. And if we can sort of suspend our willingness to jump on that train and take that information and start doing our own research and see how much of it makes sense. That is a skill that very few of us have anymore. So when
because people are too busy and they want to just take the easy route, and the easy route is the con game. Or like with anything, if you want the easy way, you end up being coerced into something you didn't want to buy.
Right. This is an interesting question, and I'm going to leave it to you. I have my own ideas about it, but James asks, what does Dr. Judy consider the most harmful for spreading disinformation in today's world, social media or mainstream media?
Probably social media, because then you have friends, or what you believe are friends, trying to coerce you. That's like peer pressure in junior high. That's dangerous. Or in high school, some kids who get sucked in with the wrong crowd. I'm using 1960s or 1970s phraseology, pardon me, but they get sucked in with the wrong crowd and they end up, doing what do you call it, shoplifting and other things they normally wouldn't have gotten into, but because they get it with this peer group and one person eggs another one on, and they end up, making decisions that they themselves would not have made alone.
That's a good point. Peer pressure is big, and I think that's where the Calvin Klein underpants comes. Oh, underpants, I shouldn't have said that. But, those kind of things.
The lack of underpants.
We're supposed
That's between me and my Calvin Kleins. Isn't that the Brooke Shields statement?
We could take that as a little soundbite. Dr. Judy says, now, this whole idea of being on the in, having the right clothes, having the right shoes.
You didn't know that was the Brooke Shields phrase about modeling the Calvin Klein jeans.
Oh,
she said nothing.
I know. I've just never heard you say.
Okay. Oh, okay.
I thought it was funny. Yes, Dr. Judy says nothing can come between me and my Calvin Kleins.
But after all, let's look at what sells. A red Corvette. It has a babe on the hood. The poster. It's in the machine shop that on the calendar or whatever. You've seen those in in repair shops. Yeah. They have calendars and they have a babe on a red Corvette or something
with the greasy hand marks where they've been turning the pages from one month to the other.
Yep. Yeah. But why would they make such ads if it wasn't didn't persuade people? See, you could be as popular as that guy driving that Corvette if you had a babe, on the hood of your car too, or if you bought this car, that would make you important. It's or like the Michael Jordan tennis shoes. $300 for a pair of tennis shoes for an elementary school kid. Why would a parent pay that? Because the kid wants it badly, because the peer pressure has made them believe for some reason that that'll make them important or good.
Mm-hmm.
And if that peer pressure is that strong, that's what you got to really watch. That's why I say that the social media is very, very dangerous. And asking that question was a good way to bring this up. They must have known that to bring it up.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that it's all around us, but there are certain things that we can see that are shaping us and meant to get us arguing with one another. Or it's interesting how quickly the Oprah meme circulated after she had her speech. And if you dare to come along and say, well, she's part of the elite or anything, I'm not going to get into Oprah. I'm just saying if you had any dissenting opinion, you are going to show it to everybody and open yourself up to huge ridicule. And so some people just let it go.
Daggers at you. Yeah, mm-hmm. So they throw daggers at you on that. Well, it's kind of like the thing for the social justice warrior business. And there's I think a video I sent you where there's a woman on the Tucker Carlson show, and was talking about racism is bad, and therefore, white privilege is terrible. Well, isn't that racism?
Yeah,
And he was
yeah.
trying to point out the irony about that, and the person just didn't get it, or
Hmm.
was appearing to not get it. But if you say that you need to make a distinction between for skin color, that's racist. No matter what color the skin is, like if you have to, put down white people or put up white people or put down orange people and put up, whatever the deal is. If you're making a distinction on that, that's racism. If you don't want racism, stop talking about it.
Exactly.
Just live your life. Yeah.
See, now that's another one that we can take a look at when we're looking at the news or hearing the mainstream media talking about things. You've got real things to report on, I'm sure. It's not any different a world than it was when Walter Cronkite was out there. But they choose to focus on things like racism, that sort of thing. So these are the things that we're being inculcated
Stoked.
with, we're indoctrinated with,
Yeah, and stoked.
racism, sexual abuse, Me Too, all this stuff. It's, these things on their own, if they're organic, it's not a bad thing to talk about. But when it is being orchestrated, we know that there's something behind that and
Yeah,
that
and
we
if
need to
people
be
are
careful
talking
of it.
about that, yeah, people are talking about that. They're not looking at the evidence of what happened on 9/11.
Correct.
It's just being distracted away about things, but it is pretty silly to like well, your great grandfather insulted my great grandfather, so you owe me X, Y, and Z. What does that have to do with who you are and who I am? And it's just about stirring up something to argue and fight about, instead of saying, this person needs an advantage, that person needs an advantage. Well, life isn't fair. Do the best you can with what you got. Life
Right.
has not been fair to me, but as I say, it's not the life I planned, but it's the life I have. So you live it.
Hmm.
It's nothing is ever quote fair. It's how it is.
What I
And
find interesting
go
about
ahead.
you is that you were going along, minding your own business, being a professor. You had a very good job. You had a good career that was based on the academic pursuits that you had. So
What I did, I earned my way there. Right.
you did, and it wasn't necessarily easy, but that's beside the point. You were where you wanted to be. There's no reason why you would have brought this on yourself, except that you had to say, this is what I
Integrity.
see. And this is often what happens. It can be just that simple with somebody having their life changed. I've heard it with other people that I've interviewed
Yeah,
too. They'll
Judith Curry is
Yes.
one I've come upon recently, who she's much less outspoken than I am. She just said, "Well, we need to look at the evidence first, about climate change. It is, how do we know if man's causing it or not? Let's look at the evidence that shows that. Let's study it." And for that, she got raked over the coals and ended up getting out of academia, and no way can she get another job anywhere else because of how badly she's been trashed on the internet. And that's the kind of world we're going to have is it's mob rule. It's not a civilized society when you have witch hunts and mob rule. That is probably the most important thing. Maybe we ought to make a T-shirt out of that. Do we want a civilized society, or do we want barbaric witch hunts based on mob rule?
Yes.
And then
There's
a mob that's been psyopted.
that's I guess that's the biggest thing. And at the top of the show, I actually took some footage from, I think it was 1968. I thought it was from the 50s at first. But there are actual people that are out there doing psyops training. That's part of what they do as their work. And I was raised in an army environment, and I was very aware that that was part of the deal. maybe not when I was very young, but when I was looking back on it, I could see when you're surrounded by fear. It starts with fear. Let's get you all scared. Let's get you all under the
Hmm.
desks, as though that's going to do any good if there's a nuclear bomb. But it's this fear tactic that breaks us down, and that's what happened on 9/11 as well, and all of these different.
An
Okay, they're
attack on
not a
human
false flag. They're
consciousness.
just psyop activities. I'm going to call them. Go ahead.
Yeah, I prefer. Yeah, I like not using the talking points names. Yeah, it's indoctrination of fear. And look at what's come of that. Like, I think last time I talked about the guy who cooked his kid in the car.
Mm-hmm.
But they had video of him at the forgot what it was, Chick-fil-A before, that had a picture of him go through every intersection, picture of him parking his car in the parking lot, picture of, everything what he did on the internet all day long. Then he came out, at noon and put something in his car. They have a video of that, and then the actual video. Then they have camera image of him going through every single intersection after that. Would people have allowed that if it hadn't been for 9/11? I don't think so. Right. It's just I'm not talking about guilt or innocence or whatever about it, but just it just hit me how much data they had on this, person who just went through this maneuver that one day. They could back up all the various traffic cameras, and there's something about being able to be private that humans like. Um, in other animals too. It's like when you go to the bathroom, you like to do it by yourself. You don't want to, sit in a toilet out in the middle of the intersection, or the traffic island there. You like to be in a private place because you're vulnerable. And so there's certain things you want else in your life that you like to do privately, or just to be able to be yourself and not be a machine
Mm-hmm.
that's manipulated with some strings attached to you, like a puppet. And there's something about being able to decide when and where you're going to take a walk, and not have that owning you. And people are willing to give these things up. It's been in our lifetime. We can see how it's been, um, very rapidly people funneled into this.
Well, and that's perpetuating this idea of being, again, psyoped, about being controlled, let's call it that. Because not only at that point are you being surveilled, but you're aware that you're being surveilled. That I think people
And
want you to
accepting
know
it.
that you're being surveilled, because then there's even less of a tendency to question things. This is the pot with the frogs being placed in. The water's
Hmm.
cool, and then they just start heating up the water. And we're in the midst of that right now. There's a coup going on in the United States. There's a civil war
Hmm.
that they're trying to foment, and it's working quite well. It's just that they're not bringing out the obvious things like the guns and the normal warfare. And I think 9/11 was proof of that, because we're all standing there watching something that is taking place before our very eyes. It's a form of warfare.
And if you even question, like, well, where's all the debris? How dare you question this? You are some low life to question it. How horrible of you! You're so un-American. This, or you're insulting the victim's family. There's all sorts of what do you call it? Talking points and responses that you get to to coerce you into not looking at it.
Right.
It kind of like the climate thing is it's a solved whatever. It's beyond questioning. It's boom. And people are so easily coerced that way by peer pressure.
Mm-hmm. Well, again, it goes back to that idea of the social media. It's all one big ball of wax. It's hard to unravel one from the other, and I think that's the way
Hmm.
it's being planned to be. It's oh, somebody was asking about a video where you okay. It says, I'll read it. James says, Dr. Judy showed a video in one of her lectures of a scientist who asked a fellow scientist who asked fellow scientists on the same panel to raise their hands in regard to
Mm-hmm.
cold
Yep.
fusion. Could she please refresh us on this?
Yeah, that was what was it, 1989? It was Stephen Jones who held his hand up as he was asking the question. In other words, a subliminal power of suggestion. He held his hand up, and cold fusion. We won't research that anymore. It's a solved thing. It's dead. It's not worth researching, right? Do you agree? Raise your hand. Let's have by show of hands, and pretty soon as people hands go up, other ones say, I don't want to be left out. I don't want to look like a stick in the mud. I'll raise my hand too. And I recognize that same trick when, especially Stephen Jones would give a talk, and then let's have by a show of hands how many agree that thermite had something to do with it, and all the hands start going up. And then pretty soon those people are locked in to that mindset. Before they realize it, they agreed to it, and now they believe that they made the decision on their own. And that's what I see about this C-16 bill. It's requiring you to say certain things, not prohibiting you from saying certain things that are hurtful to others, but it's requiring you to say certain things. If you're required to say certain things out of your mouth, you have to incorporate it into it's a brainwashing type thing. And when will be the next thing we're required to say?
People may not know about the C-16, but if you want to check into it, it's a Canadian law that just came into being, and I think that was late last year. I think it was about October. And
I thought it was in June or July. It's
okay.
yeah, in the
Not,
mid sometime in the summer.
okay. So
But
C-16.
people weren't paying attention.
Yes. Well, we're bringing it back to your attention because this is very insidious. Could you just give a little brief explanation of what C-16 is, Dr. Judy?
Oh, it's my understanding. I haven't read it, but it's my understanding from all the responses to it. It's presented like the Patriot Act. Doesn't it sound patriotic? That you're supposed to be, helping transgender people, and by not making them feel ostracized. So you're supposed to use certain pronouns, whatever one they like the best to describe them. And there's a list of like 30 or 60 or something pronouns, not just he or she, not just they, but a whole bunch of pronouns. And if you use the wrong pronoun with someone that they don't like, then you can get fined or taken to court or jail, or something bad will happen to you. So they're putting this big pressure on. Why wasn't there such a pressure with I go into a store and somebody sees me from the back and says, sir, and then I turn around, I'm sorry, ma'am, I'm sorry, and the person's face turns bright red. It has nothing to do with respecting people. It has to do with just identifying somebody generically. I don't have a problem if somebody accidentally called me he. I didn't think that they were doing it offensively. It's just that they were doing the best guess based on how I was dressed or my hairstyle or something. My hair was up under my hat, and sir, that's just a typical kind of thing. And if you start having this whole slew of things that you have to remember who has what pronoun to use with them, but why are people being catered to? Is that helping the people who are being catered to? And they're being made to feel special because of something that's not of their accomplishments. If you accomplish something like you beat the world record in running or something, that's an accomplishment. But if it's just because you're on some list, like with your skin color or whatever, it's like racism. If the people have adjustment problems, help them deal with that. But if you can't legislate morality, and lots of people have various problems. Should we have a law for every problem that somebody has? How about single mothers? You're going to be required to address them a certain way. Where does it stop? Whatever happened to sticks and stones can break my bones. And kids in elementary school are nasty. That's just how they are. And I think it's easier to indoctrinate kids early and help them through that, and so they learn to shrug it off. But whether they get made fun of their weight or whatever it is, that's what kids do,
Mm-hmm.
and they need to learn how to negotiate life.
Adults do it. They just do it in a more kind of manipulative way, and
Yep.
behind
And so
behind
I think it's
backs.
important to help people adjust to that, because that's just what happens now. There's one thing I would have a harder time with now compared to when we were kids is the internet business. Like the kids in junior high and high school, their emotions are much more delicate. And I've read cases about like a girl gets enticed to a party, they get her drunk and they rape her in front of a camera. She's out of it, and then they post the video online. And then it's so upsetting that the person goes and kills himself. You should go after people who actually do something like that. Or the
Mm-hmm.
Tyler Clementi incident. That was a freshman at, I think it was Rutgers. It was in New Jersey. And he was a violinist, and he was gay, and his roommate understood that, and they'd take turns as to who would have the room that Friday night or whatever. And it was his turn to have the room for his date, and the roommate through the next room drilled a hole in the wall and put a camera in and videotaped it and live streamed on the internet what Tyler was doing with his date.
Mm-hmm.
And shortly after that, he jumped off a bridge and killed himself. So going back to when we were, at that age, there wasn't that kind of streaming junk on the internet, and kids have to realize you don't hurt people like that. It's unconscionable.
Well,
And those
that's
things that should be addressed rather than just this specific class of people, that specific class of people. Pretty soon everybody's an exception, and they're living life to be an exception, not living life to accomplish anything.
and it feels to me that this is all part of the same conversation, because when we look at what
Hmm.
happened on 9/11, I think really what it is it's this idea of being a group consciousness rather than thinking for ourselves as well, because it really was an experience that we supposedly saw on TV together. Fortunately, I didn't see it. I listened to the radio, but when you see something together, when you experience something together, it has an interesting effect. Like if you go with your friends to a movie, then you feel like you've shared an experience and you have a reference point.
Mm.
And so you kind of
Maybe
keep.
that's also helped me is that I experienced it independently first, and I had my own perception, and others were seeing it as a group thing.
Mm-hmm.
Because
Yeah.
I have this radio station that's very obnoxious. I teach a class late on Tuesdays, where I used to then, and so I would like to wake up late, just whenever my body wanted to get up, but make sure I would wake up by a certain time. I had my clock radio would kick on, and I had this very obnoxious radio station to make sure I'd get up, because
Mm-hmm.
it was so horrible you wouldn't want to listen to it. You'd want to shut it off. And so I woke up before then and was entering grades on the computer in the next room, and on comes these guys talking about, yeah, somebody got drunk last night at the party and made a wrong turn, drove their airplane into the building. And I thought it was a joke. So, okay, when are they getting to the punchline? And on it went. And these guys joking, or is it for real, or is it psyops, or what the deal is the deal? So then I actually owned a TV. Then I went and turned it on. And I saw the same thing on every channel, and I'm thinking this is downright weird. So already when I went to campus, I had this other perception. I didn't see it as a group. I had saw it independently. And oh wait, one other step there. So they're saying something about happened at the Pentagon. Well, my parents live real near Pentagon. So okay, see, I'm skeptical if this is a real event or not. So I thought I need more data. So I called my mom to have her look out and see if there's fighter jets overhead. Because if somebody's attacking the Pentagon or attacking the nation's capital, you'd have fighter jets overhead, wouldn't you? And she goes out, looks outside. Nope, no fighter jets. So she was then skeptical too.
You had a unique situation in that you had their parents that could see what was happening in real time. And
Oh
and yet.
no, not both parents. My dad was a different situation. He was out in his garden,
Mm-hmm.
And then the neighbor who normally worked at the Pentagon, she was at a meeting across town. She got sent home and from the meeting, and she comes home and runs to my dad for comfort. Yeah, scared to death. So then now my dad's scared to death. So they entered it totally differently,
Mm-hmm.
and that made a big influence, I think.
I'm curious with our audience where they were when 9/11 hit and how that affected
If
them.
they were, yeah, if they're in a public, with others, or if it was independently.
Makes a big difference. And I think there's also that sense of how you were raised, whether you're raised to believe in Santa Claus, and as I was, my dad used to get out all the stops and pretend he was Santa and the whole bit. So there's a lot of our own upbringing that will create these filters or lack thereof in our life, depending on
I
our
I think
parents.
that Santa Claus is such a tradition, but I think it's a very good tradition because it teaches kids that even your parents can pull a psyop on you.
Yeah. That,
So why not somebody else? I would think it would help people realize that psyopses happen.
right. So I think what you're saying here, and also what you were saying earlier, is that facing these things, I'm trying to phrase it in such a way that it sort of brings it together, but facing things is part of how we learn critical thinking and how we learn to be confident in our ideas and to be strident, I suppose. Not that you said that, but I'm sort of interpreting that. And when we coddle people and when we make victims out of everybody, this is how we get into this idea that society is going to protect us, the government's going to protect us. We can't, go
We
out
can't
on
protect
our own.
ourselves, so we need Big Daddy or Big Mommy to protect us.
We're fragile.
Right. Rather than I got to insert my snow shoveling story. My brother earned money shoveling snow, and I wanted some money to buy a radio. So how do I earn money? It's snowing, so let me see if I can go shovel snow. And I go up to this house, and I've got my hair in braids, and then they don't want a girl because girl can't. Too big a driveway, too big of a walkway. Oh, okay. So I stuck my braids up in my hat, and then I go to the next one and act like I'm a little boy, and then they hire me. So I doing a good job shoveling the walk in the driveway, and partway through, braids pop out, and then they realize it's a girl, and then they're even more impressed. And they bring out, hot chocolate for me and whatnot. And then it comes summertime, and those same people then hire me to mow the lawn. Now, nowadays it's like, way sexism, way.
Mm.
Instead of realizing, okay, let's, show them that you can do it.
Mm.
I look like a little boy, and it's okay, fine. And then they hire me, and I can show them I can shovel blocks.
Right. It's kind of bizarre that had to be the way, and probably wouldn't be quite that way now, but it's
Right,
interesting.
right, but having a kid figure out how to work their way through reality. This is the way it is,
Hmm.
and the kid figure it out rather than run to mommy to have mommy solve the problem for him.
Right. Yeah,
And I
exactly. And
think,
it even sounds harsh now when I think about it, because I started raising my kids a long time ago when that was the normal thing to do, to get kids to think for themselves and to be somewhat independent. But now that's a weird idea. We want to be, caring for their
or
feelings and, which
or,
it's
or like the walking home from elementary school. I think I was in fourth grade at the time. And the kids come at one pinching me and one yanking one hair out of my head, another one pulling the hair out of the other side of the head, just to see what would happen if they annoyed me. And I had my trumpet back then in their wooden cases, not fiberglass, and I spun around, bop bop bop, and hit them.
I love that story. I think it's hilarious.
And they left me alone after that. They had respect for me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And nowadays you probably get called into court for something like that. But kids at that age are negotiating how to get along with each other.
That's true. Now, I have a few different people. It's kind of interesting. One was at an 8th grade assembly. One was home with a toddler. Somebody was 16 and had a ticker tape came across the screen. And interestingly enough, they were expecting the towers to collapse. Amazing, eh? And then I find this interesting because JoJo says, was home alone, but went straight to work in an ER in DC waiting for casualties. The doctor at the scene stated everyone was charred and there was no casualties. Everyone was dead. So that's an interesting one right there. Thanks, JoJo.
Yeah, and from the story, like just like 9/11, all these hot fires, and so that would, if that was the first thing you heard, in New York, then you would be thinking hot fires. It was how things were first presented to people, because first impressions stick, and especially this traumatic situation. Yeah, that you fill in the blanks. You don't know the facts, but you fill in the blanks based on just one phrase here or there.
Well, I'm curious how that would change the perception, because that was in DC. So that would be where the Pentagon, supposedly was hit, and that there was no survivors. And that was the message when she got into work. I find that really interesting that they were gone.
They already
were
had
dead.
yeah.
And don't you usually bring the bodies in anyway? I'm curious about that, JoJo.
That's something that I figured out from this. They took them to Dover Air Force Base to be identified. They didn't take them to local morgues.
Right. Interesting.
And so what I found interesting about that is people, if you didn't have bodies going to morgues, how is anyone to know if their bodies even existed? You just have to trust somebody's word for it. That's why I wonder about the Dover, Delaware Air Force Base, that they carved the bodies out of sight there rather than letting anybody in the local morgue identify the body or what happened to the body. It was a top secret thing.
This is the first time I've ever heard from a nurse that was involved in this, and I just was wondering about her response, and she says that she searched for the truth. And I'm really curious about this kind of thing, how people begin that search, because that's such a great statement. I love that. I searched for the truth.
She realized that, I'm guessing there weren't, very many bodies that got brought in. And so doesn't make you scratch your head. Yeah, that's brilliant that she had some brain cells working that day.
This is what she says. He said that they were burnt beyond recognition. And yes, the bodies did not go to morgues. And that was also strange. So here we have it firsthand. And I love this kind of firsthand information because it really helps others. It
validates what I had read too, that it's another sourcing of the story that they didn't go to local morgues, they indeed did go to Dover, Delaware, and that was just weird.
Apparently she was involved with the anthrax as well. I guess when you're in DC, you're going to have firsthand knowledge of some of these things that are taking place before your eyes, as your parents had that experience as well. Just not seeing fighter planes. You don't have to have a question about it. That's the thing that I love. And what I love about when I first read your book, I just loved the fact that there was no question about this actually took place. This was real. Here's some pictures. Here's some evidence. And I just love that because for my mind, I like to put together the puzzle pieces. But there's no point in even starting if you don't have the right evidence.
Right. You hear there's no stand-down orders. Well, if there were no planes, then you wouldn't need stand-down orders.
Well, this is really interesting. So JoJo says she took care of the postal worker that died of the anthrax as well. Boy, you've been right in the heart of things. It's amazing that we have that person right here in our midst. No wonder you're interested in Dr. Judy. Now, I'm wondering, have you read Where Did the Towers Go, JoJo, or anybody else in the audience there? It's a pretty important thing to do.
How that postal worker got contaminated. When my perception of the anthrax thing, which is, I call that Nagasaki. Remember there's a 1-2 punch, Hiroshima, Nagasaki, and so you don't want to mess with that. That shuts everybody down. You don't want to question it. Like I think that was to Congress. to, like, sit down and do what we say, or else. But I was in my lab at the time that, was it Tom Ridge? Was he got irritated? He was like, he did, there's no danger anymore. Everything's fine. And he got so irritated with people for worrying about it, because they wanted to shut off the panic. And he said, there is no danger. The mail is completely safe. He was just angry and doing it that way. And I looked at my graduate student, who's from Pennsylvania, and said, how does he know? And I put a grin on my face. That was, to me, the biggest giveaway right there. For him to be so emphatic about it, it's they wanted to turn off the panic. But if it truly was in the mail system, there wouldn't be just one postal worker. You'd have it through, conveyor belts and spread all over the country.
Mm-hmm. Jojo says,
So
we thought we were going to get it secondhand, so they're wearing biological warfare suits.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
It was this big panic that got turned on, and it served its effectiveness, and they wanted to turn off it, but people weren't turning off the panic. And so that's why Tom Ridge went and made that statement, and that statement itself gave it away. How would he know that he was being 110% sure that there's no danger anymore? How can you be that sure? Because how do you know if a letter went through the mail system sprinkling out something? You can't stop. It's all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
And how could they be that sure? Because it didn't go through the regular mail system. So I think the postal worker who was unfortunately, was the one who happened to have to make the delivery that day, and it got into his stuff. Poor guy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Wrong place, the wrong time.
Well, I think it's really interesting to have you in the audience, Jojo. Thank you very much for sharing that.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
she says, yes, that is true, what you just said. So, it'd be really interesting to talk to you on one of our shows. One of the things that we've done in the past is to have someone from the audience on to talk about their experience and to allow Dr. Judy to go through some of her presentation. But I don't necessarily want to go through the whole presentation, but it's certainly interesting to help other people see things through Dr. Judy's eyes, and to have someone like Jojo talk about the experience and kind of add.
It's neat when the two things, different puzzle pieces of the same picture.
Yeah, to add to the evidence, I think, is amazing. Rather than people going back and forth about their ideas, I think having someone that can actually add evidence is I find it really exciting, actually, to have you there. So
especially the business of having to wear the hazmat suits, that when the panic was cranked up.
Mm-hmm.
But most people didn't realize this, because they just move on. But if you look back at it, why was it so limited? And the anthrax business, and it didn't go right through the regular postal system, because it would have turned up elsewhere. That and how much of a psyop that was.
Mm-hmm.
To some people got damaged by it, but the effect that they're going for, I think it was making sure everybody signed the Patriot Act or something like that. It was also, you knew that your history if you didn't join in.
Gosh, we have somebody else who was working in the building next door to the WC buildings. She got stuck there, but finally escaped. She came down with pancreatic cancer and died not long after that, about 2 to 3 years later. And I'm sorry to hear that. And it's very
the buildings
sad.
were dustified, and whoever breathed in there, that you breathed in everything that, because it was like 1/100th of the size of red blood cells, which is approximately the size of DNA. It's going through the blood-brain barrier. It's going through, just inhaling it into your lungs. It's in your bloodstream. And dustified buildings with all sorts of stuff in them, whether if it's atomized iron or atomized rock, atomized whatever, it's right in your bloodstream, and that's going to destroy people. They're not designed for that.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think the most difficult thing for people to really wrap their mind around, if indeed they can wrap their mind around dustification at all, is that there is biological matter in that dust as well.
Not burnt up, but biological material. And if it was high heat, you wouldn't have had that. You wouldn't have had organic material.
Yeah. So it's really difficult to consider these things when we really start to delve into them, because the implications are just so horrendous. And yet there are so many things in the world where the implications are horrendous. And I think that's getting back to your issue about strengthening ourselves through the sticks and stones concept. It helps us to face some of these things and deal with them. And I wonder how I see the reason why they're trying to make us soft and unable to look at things that are real. Because
we're easier to manage.
Much easier to manage. And it's happening. We see the whole snowflake situation for what it is at this point, because if we even raise it, it's like, oh, I don't really like to think about those things. Well, I don't either, but I'm taking responsibility for thinking so that we don't all go down with the ship.
Right. So if you're, these, that offends me, so you can't talk about that offends me, so you can't talk about, and pretty soon whatever happens, PsyOp happens, people just will accept it, not question it one bit. You're right about that.
Yeah, it as we talk, it makes more sense because I see the patterns of behavior and the reasons behind some of these things. Like I look at Antifa, it's not about people being more strident. It's about people being more fearful. They cover their faces. They won't be on camera, but they're out there to intimidate and scare the people that are speaking out. So,
the 1960s protests until they started shooting people, it was all about just voicing your opinion freely and feeling comfortable doing so.
Mm-hmm. And then they would be infiltrated. I know that was the case in my particular area. They infiltrated it with people that were, I remember a guy named Lorne, and I thought, how come he has a house of his own? How come he's inviting us over there? I mean, he plied us with anything we wanted, alcohol, drinks, whatever it was. I'm not suggesting that that was my lifestyle. I'm just saying that because I was involved in that protest movement, that was the exposure. And I look back now and I see what the point was, because we were all underage kids. And that's the way you're going to bring them into the fold, isn't it?
Because they could tell on you if you control you.
Yes.
And the other, it's not infiltrated. They don't leave up to chance whether a group it forms or not. They go ahead and start the group first, and so they control it from the ground up.
Yeah, and that's something that I understood from my early experiences, I suppose. I didn't really understand them as I do now, of course, but I had an inkling that things were not as they seemed because of my own experience and seeing things like that. This person who was probably early 20s, and he owned a house and invited us all over. And, I look back on it and I start seeing all of these red flags, I suppose, that this was not the person that I thought he was. And that's it just in my small town, really, relative to some of these places like D.C. and New York and, places where they seem quite invested in getting, I think the sanctuary cities is another thing that has a lot more meaning, because how do whole cities get behind this idea? How does the mayor and city council get behind this idea so quickly?
Of ignoring the law. Yeah.
Yeah. Whole cities, you can't get them to pass anything, and yet all of a sudden they're deciding to defy the law en masse as a group.
I was reading a book, I forgot the name of it now, that Beverly something is the name of the person who wrote the book, but they start out at the beginning of the book explaining about how they've figured out things. There's for example, like this is, I don't know if it's in the book or not, but it's a it's parallel if nothing else. Uh, let's say you're going to you have a small town and Walmart wants to build there. You need to get permission from the town to allow the zoning for the Walmart to be there.
Mm-hmm.
And so they already have this under control from the get-go. So you get the regular townspeople that go there, and you know how groupthink is. You have the Walmart people who are there and have enough what do you call it momentum that they try to get everybody else on board with them, as though they're from the audience. You know, they pretend like they're just other citizens in the community.
Right.
And if you question it, they act like they're fellow citizens in the community when they attack you and ostracize you.
Mm-hmm.
And so nobody else is going to speak up, and everyone's going to, join in and go with the consensus. It's about how to do group think, and they that's so how did the sanctuary cities work? It's probably the same way. And the person who's running the manning the store, the mayor and all that stuff, they figured out how to operate those people too. Like, oh, we can plant this evidence in your house and plant that evidence in your house and say that you're a cocaine dealer and send you to prison. But you agree with us, so you wouldn't have us go to that extent, would you? Ha ha ha. Whatever they need to do.
Well, this is the part that we don't really understand, I think, if we haven't been involved in politics. And I think about Cynthia McKinney that I interviewed a few months ago, and she said how appalled she was when she arrived at on Capitol Hill, thinking, sort of a Pollyanna, thinking that she was going to change things. And the first thing they do is to try to get you involved in something nefarious, get you on one of those planes or go to one of those parties or, put whatever it is in, fill in the blank. But I think partly being a woman, it was more difficult to entice her in those areas. But also I think that she just wasn't interested in that sort of thing. And that's why they had to annihilate her. So that's so clear when you start looking at it in retrospect.
Mm-hmm.
So I would like people to start seeing this for what it is before the fact. And
or somebody who's been in Congress for 30 years or 20 years, and then they discovered they're a pedophile. That should be a red flag.
And right now,
they've been a pedophile all along, but they got outed because they decided they didn't want to be controlled anymore and weren't going to behave the way the crew wanted them to behave, and so they outed them to get rid of them.
I have a different perspective, too, about the whole pedophile thing. I don't think they started off being pedophiles. I think that they are so-called compromised because they're put in these situations. They're tempted. Oh. It's like the apple. Right. This is the one thing you can't have. Yeah. Well, I'm going to take that.
I'm not saying they were a pedophile before they got to DC. I'm saying they weren't even a pedophile necessarily, but they had the data on them from the first, what do you call it, the freshman, mixer.
Yeah,
They get the compromising images. Yeah, and so they can they now have that over their head, and then pretty soon the person says, okay, fine, turn me in, I don't care anymore, I'm not going to vote the way you want me to vote.
And here's the newest
then
one.
They out them.
They're going to out the people, how they have this thing where they paid out a bunch of people who had sexual allegations against them. Well, right now, that's the newest thing where they can just say, okay, there's a non-disclosure agreement that the person makes when they settle the agreement. But now the powers that be can just say, we are going to expose those people. The victims signed the non-disclosure, but we didn't sign it.
They're not going to do all of them. They're going to do whatever ones, and then because they still need to have something over their heads. Mm-hmm. Like this Anthony Weiner guy. How long have they known whatever, but he was no longer manageable, so then that's how they throw him by the wayside.
Well, I think that there's a PsyOp within a PsyOp with him as well. I think that's a cover for the whole email thing. So that's an entire subject of itself, and people can form their own opinions. But the idea is for everybody in the audience, take a look at all of these things that we're mentioning here and just don't take them at face value. If it's possible to block out some of these things and say, oh, what's the pattern I'm seeing here? don't they want me to look at? What don't they want me to see?
Mm-hmm.
And just understand that these are patterns. It's not a new thing. It's a way of doing things that's been going on for years. And that video that I showed was 1968. I know that they were doing this in the 50s. I think they were doing it in Roman times, so it's not
Oh, they
new.
do it everywhere. You hear about politics of at your employment. You know, if you work for a business, they or educational department or anything. There's always work politics, and you just scale that up, and you can imagine this business work politics everywhere. It's how far do people's conscience allow them to play the game.
Yeah, and then if their conscience doesn't allow them to play the game, then surprisingly enough, they're on one of those planes that goes down without much
Hmm.
understanding of how it did that.
Or they rig them out. That's what I call it. Rig them out in the next election.
Mm-hmm.
They can control the votes, so they rig them out.
Yeah,
Like
offer them some
I
other
can,
position.
yeah. There's certain ones I tip my tongue. I mean, there's quite a
Devin
few of
Nunes.
them. After 9/11, they just rigged out the election. They claimed that people didn't vote for them, but no, they just make the vote come out however they want them to come out.
Right, I see what you're saying. Now, there is something else in here I just wanted to ask you, and I'm trying to see it in the questions here. There is a question, about Barbara Honegger. Do you know anything about her? Her presentation on the Pentagon attack?
Yeah, it's yeah. That everything I've seen about how she operates is who's her employer? Do you think she's free to say what really happened?
Well, and not unless she's Judith Curry and is willing to
Yep,
take the
yep.
consequences.
And there's various instances where that I saw where she's squirming. I was at a conference where there's somebody who I wanted to talk with, and Barbara Honegger wanted to listen in, and she wouldn't go away, so we couldn't talk. And so this guy started talking with Barbara Honegger, and they started talking about something, and she was saying, "Oh no, that can't be, that can't be." And oh, look at this! And this is the first time I saw an iPhone. He had videos on his iPhone showing her. Oh, but explains away until he had her so cornered she could not deny whatever. And she said that. Uh, oh, okay, I'll go ahead and tell you what the subject matter was. It was about the moon landing business. And then she got to the point where, okay, he'd proved it to her about these videos that were on the TV set about moon landing were fake, and she had to agree. She says, "Oh, but they filmed those, on Earth just in case they couldn't get transmission from the moon, which they couldn't get, so that's why those were aired."
Mm-hmm.
But the way she's fighting over it until she had to acknowledge that those were fake videos. It's like anything goes. But at the same conference, she tried to act like an airhead, clueless person, and had her cell phone going off every few minutes to distract. This is while I was giving my presentation, to distract
Mm-hmm.
from my presentation, act like, oh, she just forgot her cell phone was on. Oh, it's my work calling me, and oh, don't let them know where I am. She worked at the Pentagon, Don't let them know where I am. They shouldn't know where I am. You're telling me that people at the Pentagon don't know where she is? Uh-huh.
Especially with a cell phone.
Yeah, and try to act like this airhead bimbo, and cell phone went off, I don't know, 15 times or so during my presentation. It was a distraction away from things. And after that, you say, okay,
Mm-hmm.
consider the source.
This is an interesting one, and I'm not sure if you know about
And wait a minute.
Sorry,
Now,
go ahead.
don't ignore this detail. She saw my presentation,
Yes.
but it's busy trying to bury it. What does that tell
Mm-hmm.
you? Okay.
Yeah, no, these are the things that is important. I'm sorry they glossed over it because that's the most important
Yep.
aspect. Right. So again, I think that we can judge a lot of things by first of all, who has read Dr. Judy Wood's book, Where Did the Towers Go? And then what did they do with that information? Was it buried? Was there some sort of organization that rose up around that to debunk certain things? Or was there a true and honest investigation into the facts? How many people do you know that are doing a true and honest investigation?
Into facts and not just trying to promote, a story.
I think one of the things that I would like to see is the evidence from this case that you presented. Now, I understand that it can't be retried. It can't be brought up again in its form.
Well, you want to see the evidence? Now, it's of course, in more organized form, but that's what my book is.
So, what if everybody? We don't have huge numbers of people watching the show, which I find interesting because I think part of it is that it's suppressed. It's really surprising to me how as soon as you put Dr. Judy Wood on anything, it gets suppressed. It's amazing to me because I can do other shows where I know that the person I'm interviewing is not that important because you get lots of views, you get lots of people watching live because it's not being buried. There was a Project Veritas video last week talking about how Twitter vets the tweets that they're going to allow to go out. Well, I think that the same thing is happening, of course, on YouTube.
Right. Let me add something about that thing. Well, there's a guy who just discovered my work. This is several years ago, and he make a video about it. He put it on link to it on, is it Twitter or is it one of those sites? And immediately he got banned. His account was shut down, and then he put it on a different place, and it would be banned. So he made a video about that.
Well, I want people to know that every video that I make, this is one reason I go live, because if I make a video and I edit it and I post it, it will immediately get banned. Well, okay, let's say it's not appropriate for viewers and they'll either hide it or they will say that it's not appropriate. I've had it taken down before. But in some way, they will try to get rid of it. And I want people to know that, because some people are very surprised when they see that there's only a few people watching. And this is why it's important that we use social media to let people know, because they'll never know just by finding us on YouTube. You need to let people know when the show is going live. And my goal in doing this is to get the word out to people, even if it's one by one. And hopefully there's enough people with strong enough constitutions to be able to buy an extra book and give it to somebody. Because can you imagine the effect that would have if you've read the book, you understand the information, you come here on a Saturday, you get your questions answered in a sincere way, not distracted, which I really appreciate about this audience. They're very much here wanting to learn, and then hand that information to someone else. Maybe give them this video to begin with and buy the book and give it to them.
Get the book and hand it to a lawyer or something. And actually, the lawyer who was helping me with my case, how he came to learn about me is he saw some nasty stuff. People were making fun of my website, and he went and looked at it and was, oh my gosh, this is evidence admissible in court. And that's the first time he'd seen anything with 9/11 that wasn't just he said, she said, who said, what said. It was just evidence that it's admissible in court. And my book is completely that. It's evidence. Mm-hmm. And no one is refuted, nor can you. You can't refute something that's fact.
Precisely. And, it's interesting to me, because I don't want to get into a male-female thing, but I find it really interesting because the women that we've encountered, or that I've encountered myself, are much more able to understand the meaning of this and not getting distracted over to how did this happen, that happen. If you want to find out go read the book because it's all there. And if you don't want to read the book, at least go to the website because it's got pictures. And if you have any ability to understand what the pictures mean, it will be obvious that the story as advertised is not accurate. Just look at some of the government-produced images of, say, Ground Zero. It's one city block. There's great big holes in the ground. These are not things that are caused by fire.
They're not produced images, captured images, whatever. That's and the stuff before 2012. That was when they, quote, modernized the Smith-Mundt Act. But before then, because people who worked for the government it was considered treason to put out PsyOps in the report to another government agency. That's the government attacking itself. So the NIST report, they can have the wrong conclusion, they can ignore stuff, but they can't put in fabricated pictures. They can't put in fabricated false evidence.
Again, evidence. Yeah.
Yep. And just like they acknowledged that it was whisper quiet demise of the buildings, they didn't know what to think of it, so they ignored it. Fine, but they couldn't claim that it was a bangity bang collapse.
Right.
They can ignore data and make the wrong conclusions, but they can't make up false information, false facts.
I have a comment here from Planet de la Tourette. My French accent is terrible, and I'm thinking they may come from France. It says, this is BS. Woods shows are not less viewed. Alternative media can't generate traction even after years. Well, I'm curious about that because there are channels that have over 100,000 subscribers, and they have thousands and thousands of views each time they do a show. So I think alternative media is a big area. Some of it's allowed through. It's like an hourglass. Some of the grains are allowed through and some of them are not.
Recently in, I think it was Turkey, or country near in that neighborhood, but I think it was Turkey, that somebody had read my book and was talking about it, in Turkish on the TV set. It's the equivalent of the Charlie Rose show, that type of a sit-down talk show, but it was on regular television. And that got an amazing amount of views pretty quickly, but also what showed up is, and the guy who was on the thing, who had contacted Andrew Johnson, had said that he had a feeling that a lot of the troll comments on there were in English and then translate with Google Translate or something into the Turkish thing and paste it on there because it was really bad Turkish. Yeah, because it doesn't translate well, but you translate it back in English and it's perfect English. So there's something. He had a feeling that it was English-speaking trolls that were translating their statements through Google Translate and posting it there. But there's a lot of them that were taking the seriousness of it, and that one had like 1 million views in just like a little over a week's time or something like that. It was some humongous number. It may not have been that many. I don't remember the exact number, but it was an enormous number of views compared to what you get in our own country. Now, how do you explain that? Other than they don't have the gatekeepers there yet.
Interesting. Yes. Well, I guess everyone is entitled to their own ideas about how things work. All I can say is the evidence is all I go by, and I get these messages.
Yeah, like
YouTube.
how many threats I've had doesn't tell you, whether my information is true or false. But I do know, like, if you do a search on my name on YouTube, and then sort it by most recent, comes to the top, and you have some 6 months old stuff that comes up that has Fetzer talking about my work, or and then other stuff that's a day old or whatever. But interspersed right up to the top, some stuff is 4 years old. That comes up. So why is that? Their search thing can't be that poor.
Oh,
That, and
definitely,
same
yeah.
with Google search, that there's stuff that it is gets priority over other stuff, and other stuff is gets buried, just like that recent Twitter thing was talking about.
Hmm.
That's just accept that that's how it is, rather than, oh, if it was important, it would come to the top. Well, who determines if something is important?
And anybody who has taken a look at the Project Veritas video that just came out will understand exactly what's happening, because these are actual people talking about how it works. There are people in behind. There are bots, but it's much worse when you have people in the background who are making these decisions, because they have so many more prejudices than bots. It's
Yeah,
what.
now think of my what do you call it, budget. It's a zero. And now think of the budget of the opposition. And then, that answers all the questions you have.
Hmm. Yeah, it's. I think that if people
It
haven't been.
isn't just,
Sorry, go
it
ahead.
isn't natural. It isn't natural. Everybody's the same. Everybody, has zero budget. No, you can, those with big budgets can hire lots of troops to, storm forums and put in all sorts of gobbledygook about what they don't want people to listen to the opposition.
Hmm.
And I think it's important that people recognize that.
Well, that's a goal here, is to get people recognizing things. I don't want to go on too long, because I know that people do have an attention span and they have other things to do with their
Hmm.
day. But feel free to take the video if you're using it. Of course, our New Year's resolution is to be honest, so that if you're using it for honest purposes, it would be great for you to just disseminate it to other people. It will be available once the show ends. It'll be part of the archive. So you can certainly go, and even if you want to take it and download it and take out parts that you find that are useful and might be helpful to other people. But the best thing I can advise is to follow the link that I have in the description. Go to Amazon, order yourself one of the books. It's probably the best thing that you'll do for yourself as far as understanding what's happening now, because anything that is not included in the narrative today is not just about 9/11, but when people are talking about lawsuits, or we're talking about alternative views of how the world is actually functioning, you can go back to the book and say, well, that doesn't really line up with the evidence, because this book contains everything that we needed to know. Why aren't we hearing about it? And we're just going to continue to try to get people
Yeah,
involved on whatever level we can.
there's so many people that see my presentation or my book and say, "My gosh, why weren't we told about this?" And the biggest thing is uh, somebody who read my book, and just the title in itself. Where did the towers go? She said, "Well, how do we know to ask that question?" And that's an important thing. Yeah, we should be asking, where did the towers go? Where did the buildings go? You see there's like nothing much there left. Where to go? Like
Hmm.
George Stephanopoulos was asking. That's actually what inspired the title.
Yeah, it, and it's great, because that's exactly the question that most of us didn't ask.
You
I
didn't
think that.
know that it was a question that should be asked, because you weren't given enough information to see that there wasn't enough rubble there. When George Stephanopoulos said that was I think it was 25 hours after the event, and I thought, oh, finally, good, somebody's asking that question I've had. That was the last time we heard it.
And that's a really good one in terms of answering any questions to do with boatloads of rubble that are going off to China, or receipts or anything. You don't need to talk about any of that at all if you understand the evidence. That's for people that really don't understand.
Or
They
want to cover
are,
up.
they,
Yeah,
yes,
that's an
certainly.
excuse as to why there wasn't enough debris there. It got shipped off to China, but there's initially this big dust cloud when the towers went away, and like 30 minutes later, you start seeing some blue sky up there, and at that moment, the stuff was already gone. I mean, you can't ship it out in 30 minutes.
That's pretty hard.
Yep.
And so any of these other, that's when questions become irrelevant, and that's part of this process too. Think about the question that you're asking before you ask it, because really it's answered in something that you already know, which is the towers are no longer there. If you see that and you understand it and you get it, then all of these other questions take care of themselves.
Mm-hmm.
As
Like
far
even the
as
guys in Stairway B of Tower One, I found when their walkie-talkies started working, they're calling out to their buddies, whatever they're saying, we're here, help. And then where are you? We're in Stairway B, second, third, and fourth floor. Where are you? Fourth tower, Stairway B. And then finally they heard the guy say back, "Where's Tower One?" They couldn't find it. It wasn't there anymore. It was just that little bump where these guys were in Stairway B.
can you imagine
And,
that from their perspective on their walkie-talkies and thinking that
yeah,
they're going to be crushed by this big building coming down?
well, they thought that they were buried under 106 stories of stuff, and no way they could excavate them before they die. From starvation or like a water or something. That's what they were thinking. And then pretty soon they looked up and saw blue sky and realized there's nothing above them.
Mm-hmm.
That's got to be the weirdest thing. And they weren't crushed nor were they cooked to death. And they walked out on their own. They saw blue sky and they walked out on their own.
Mm-hmm. And the reason for that you can find in the book, but I think that you might have a little bit of a clue for people, because there's somebody was at, oh, I know what it was. It was somebody was asking about Hurricane Erin and the field effects, but there's something to do with being grounded in that area.
Well,
As far
that's
as
the pattern that I saw, and I also see that same pattern with tornadoes. And like why do tornadoes like to get trailer parks? Because the trailers aren't as well grounded as houses. They're not totally ungrounded, but it's very little grounding them. They're not like potted in the ground. They're up on rubber tires or something with a few pipes going down. And so if you start looking at the toasted cars, another common pattern is they're up on rubber tires. Why didn't the street sign right next to the vehicle get toasted? It's just perfectly fine. Well, it's potted in the ground. Same with the buildings around. But the cars are insulated from the ground. And now the guys in Stairway B, these Stairway B, I think, is that the base of that spire that took a little bit. It was harder to go away, but the base of that is. It's not that it's not grounded at all. It's that it's. I mean, it's not grounded, not grounded issue. It's how strong is the grounding? Can it build up a charge faster than it can discharge? And if they're screwed up against the metal kick plate of the stairway, and that's grounded well, maybe that's why they're still around.
mm-hmm.
And other ones too, but it's a deal of it's an interesting phenomenon, just like with tornadoes. And actually, my uncle was hiking with a friend up in the mountains, and a thunderstorm came up. And my uncle describes how he could feel the hair on the back of his neck sticking up, like he could sense really strong static field. He just dove over the edge, figured whatever happened to him over the cliff was better than what was going to happen to him there, and he ended up falling on a ledge right over the edge of the cliff, and was knocked out for a while. Then came to. His buddy got cooked, and his shoes are burnt. Spots the shape of his shoes on the rock up above. His buddy was cooked. Got zapped by lightning, but he could sense the charge building up, and then he just dove over the cliff. And for a while, he had some tingling in his hands, and his lips were numb, and a few other things. But he survived and was able to get himself out. And so I wonder if there's something like that as a charge that was building up in stuff that wasn't well grounded on 9/11.
I have a picture of Hurricane Erin from your website on the screen right now. And it's really interesting to look at it from above because it does look so much like a tornado. There's the same kind of
Oh,
dynamics there.
yeah, it's a jumbo size, like, or a big Tesla coil. That's how it looked to me. Like, of course, it's going to create a static field. That's where I started from. Why are they hiding this hurricane from us? What does it look like it does? What do hurricanes do? Looks like a big Tesla coil. And then come to think of it, you know where the hurricane is going to go when it's changed the direction, because the birds leave town. They sense the static field. They know to run for cover. Like, and then you think about it, and people who talk about, with arthritis, talk about feeling a storm coming because they can sense the electrical change in the environment when it's nearby. So we know that there's field effects around hurricanes and around tornadoes. Having spent growing years in Tornado Alley, yeah, it's like you smell them coming. You can sense it. He just feels it in the air. So you're sensing that electrical change in the environment. And okay, what does that use then? You go from there to seeing why that's a component of the field effects.
And if you take a look at this particular hurricane, you see that, well, this is in the book. I learned it from reading the book, but then I started to do my own research about tornadoes, and you can see this on the satellite photo. You can actually track this storm that's on the NOAA site, I believe. And this is right off of New York on September 11th, but there was beautiful blue sky over the city itself, and they make a point of reiterating that quite often. But the field effects that you're talking about were actually experienced at the airport at JFK, was
At all
it?
three, yeah, and LaGuardia and Newark, all three airports reported dry thunder that day. And the outer bands of the hurricane were actually over the end of Long Island, and it was actually raining at Cape Cod. So it was
Which
that
is a little
close.
farther north, correct?
Right, right. But the outer bands being of the end of Long Island, so you knew that the actual body of the swirling clouds was right adjacent to the city, even if it wasn't right over Manhattan. So it was close enough to expect there to be field effects. And then by golly, all three major airports there surrounding Manhattan, they reported dry thunder that day.
Right.
But
It's
how
it's
interesting.
it's really fascinating. So if even if somebody is just interested in the weather aspect of this, everyone has their area of interest. This is a really great study because you can go back and take a look at the satellite photos. You can watch the trajectory of this hurricane. So you can go on to, okay, here's something that you can do, your homework. I hate homework, but sometimes it can be a fun thing to do, to go and find some part of the website that you are interested in. Like, say it's this one because somebody was talking about Aaron and it's something that I'm interested in. Then go and do your own research and take a look at the satellite photos. Then you can take a look at what actually showed up on ABC, NBC, CBS, all of the different morning shows. There's no hurricane. Now, when Harvey came this year, when any hurricane is coming down the pike,
Oh,
we
they
hear
like to
about it.
milk them.
We
Yeah,
hear about it. It's something that they milk for all it's worth. Now, and something that I found interesting was on July 22nd of 2001, Bush did an announcement at the NOAA headquarters, and he said, we're really going to track hurricanes this year. We're going to tell you when they're forming and let you know where they're going. Hurricane Aaron was the first hurricane of that year, and it wasn't
first, yeah,
reported on.
and it wasn't just a storm system. It actually was, but it was studied the most of any hurricane. And they had all sorts of different universities studying it, collecting lots of data from it.
Mm-hmm.
But it's interesting that the people in Manhattan weren't suggested to evacuate just in case. The voluntary evacuation, not mandatory, but voluntary, like what they've done with other hurricanes. Like, it's a good idea to leave, and if you might want to get a head start, and then that later on it becomes mandatory to evacuate. But before it's gotten to that point where it's still voluntary, you wonder why you didn't even hear about that.
So a lot of people
And
haven't heard
there
about.
were reported, yeah, there
Sorry.
were reported storm surges along like Atlantic City in Atlantic in the
Hmm.
New Jersey coast about the undertow was dangerous and so forth. They didn't really tell people why. And the weather report for I think it was CBS on the TV says the weather's going to be as nice as can be.
And there's Geraldo, who in retrospect said,
2010.
amazing that, can
Too
you
bad they
imagine
didn't
if
have
there was a hurricane that
yeah,
day? So you said,
yeah. We said too bad there wasn't a hurricane that day. If only there'd been a hurricane on 9/11, because then they could only maneuver by line of sight, so they wouldn't be able to see where they're going. So therefore 9/11 wouldn't have happened. That's what he's getting at. So he says, yeah, too bad there wasn't a hurricane on 9/11.
wouldn't things have been different if that were the case? Hmm. So I'm glad that you asked that. I can't remember where it was. It was earlier in the chat, and that was the one that I had forgotten. And so take a look at that if you're interested, because you'll see the
Yeah.
track. I'm going to just go down the page a little bit. You can see. Oh, and this is the other bit that I love. This is my particular interest. The wood that's gone through the tree, where people sort of go, "Oh gosh, it went right
Oh,
through the tree."
that's
Isn't that
Hurricane
amazing?
Andrew.
Sure.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
Hurricane
I'm just
Andrew.
moving down. Car sitting on fence.
It's an example of what you see with hurricanes. But now again, I'm not stating for a fact that Hurricane Aaron was used on 9/11. When it could have been. But what is obvious in it is that people weren't warned about it. That you could if the hurricane stalls out there, you're going to have a storm surge that could flood Manhattan. We're
Hmm.
not talking about a hurricane mowing down Manhattan, but right where it was sitting, if it didn't turn around and head out of town when it did, you would have had Manhattan would have been flooded. As it was, there was the great undertow and the storm surge already, and JFK Airport would have been flooded. LaGuardia would have been flooded. There have been problems, but you didn't hear any inkling. Nothing to worry about.
Nothing to see here. So the question
And the
is,
hurricane's aiming for Manhattan for 4 days in a row, straight as an arrow, going towards Manhattan. And how could they be 100%? This is the thing that got me: is how can they be 100% sure exactly when it was going to turn and head out of town, to the point they wouldn't mention it to people, that there was nothing to worry about, unless he had some way of making sure it headed out of town when it did, because the weather reports updates the text messaging that from the National Weather Service said, well, on day one, we think it's going to turn around today. Didn't. Next day, oh well, it's going to turn around today. Nope, didn't. Third day, it's going to turn around today. Nope, didn't. Fourth day, it's going to turn around today. Well, it's a good thing it did, because you ran out of turning room. If it's stayed a little bit longer, and if they had already been wrong in the other 3 days, why they know that this day they're going to be able to get it turned around.
I
There
thought
wasn't no
that up.
question it was going to turn around at some point, because you had a high pressure system moving from the west to the east, but you also had the hurricane moving from east to west. And guess where their storms systems and when they superimposed? It was at 10 a.m. on 9/11. You can see the pressure going up from the high pressure system, and then immediately starts going down right at 10 a.m. Isn't that interesting? The two storm systems met at that point over Manhattan.
I have that on the screen for anybody that wants to see it. Again, all of this can be found on drjudywood.com. You can see in the browser bar there, you can see where I am. Articles, Aaron 1, HTML. So if you want to go over there, I encourage people to follow themselves at home. Take a look at some of this information so that you can ask questions. Somebody was asking, could Hurricane Aaron have been a type of electromotive force? I apologize for my reading.
Well, it provided a static field. And actually, it was realizing that, okay, it has a static field, and because we have evidence of that from the major airports around there. So what does that do? And then later I tripped upon John Hutchison's work. Well, what he does is use a Tesla coil to create a static field, and then interferes with various radio frequency signals, and voila, these same things happen. Dustify things, or levitate things, and there's a whole bunch of interesting, directly parallel evidence.
Things
Right.
basically dematerialize during a tornado too, which is why things end up in trees. So the thing, it's beyond what I can understand, but the tree
Like you had
dematerializes and comes back together.
Tractor trailer trucks where the trailer went flying. Not the dumpsters sitting next to the thing.
So interesting.
They weren't on rubber tires, but the trailers on rubber tires. They flew like several hundred feet in the air, and they just wind doesn't do that. How do you get that much wind underneath the thing to lift it straight?
Oops, I lost her for a minute. Did I lose you altogether? I hope not. But let me just see. If I did lose Dr. Judy, she's going to be coming back, and I will just see what I can do about getting her. And yeah, right in the middle of that thought, that really important thing, I'm just going to go and check my Skype. I apologize to people if things don't seem totally professional. I'm not interested in being professional, actually. I've had people say, read better or do this or that. I just want people to know that we're just, our whole purpose in doing this is to help people to get their questions answered. And I would say, yes, I am better behind the scenes. I'm better at, just, I don't know, just doing the technical stuff. I think maybe this has something to do with my system here that's kind of gone wonky. Let me just check. Okay. I don't know if I'm going to be able to do it this way. I may have to reboot things. That would be sad. Okay. I've got a white screen here for some reason. So I'm just going to bear with me. I'm sorry about this, but I'm going to just turn things off and turn them on again. Okay. So you can tell that I'm ad-libbing while I'm trying to troubleshoot as well. This is why people have engineers. We are totally running on a shoestring here. Neither of us has, and this is how we make our living. So I just wanted to let you know that, I actually do this kind of broadcasting on a shoestring, and there's a whole story there, but it's not important to let you guys know at this point. But Dr. Judy has sacrificed everything to do this kind of work, and I just wanted to let you know while she's not here on the air, because she doesn't like to let people know. But I have a site called Tips OK, and I put it together specifically for artists, and I just started it. And I've started with Dr. Judy. So anybody that wants to give her a tip, it's really simple to do that. You can just go over to Tips OK, and that will go directly to her. Just in case, if you're appreciating her work, sometimes it's great to be able to give tangible evidence of that. Let me just give her a call here. I think we're back up and running, I hope. Okay, are you there? Are you there? Oops, the speakers are muted. My speaker? Oh. Can you hear me? Dear, we are having some issues. I'm going to check things. I don't know whether you can hear me, Dr. Judy, but I'm just sorting things out at my end. Okay. Can you hear me? Sorry, you guys. Can you hear me now? Well, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to probably wrap up this this presentation, and it has been a couple of hours, actually 2.5 hours, and I know that Dr. Judy's there, and I'm just having a problem. I think it's at my end, and I apologize to everybody for that. But what we're going to do is, I think, leave it for now, and next week on Saturday, 1 o'clock Pacific, and that would be 4 o'clock Eastern, we will get together again, and hopefully everybody has their questions. I really hope that you will pick up a copy of the book in the meantime, or at least go over to the website and check out some of the things we've been talking on the show today, and take a look at take a look at things from your perspective based on what Dr. Judy has been telling you today, and start to do your own research. And that's the only defense that we have against anybody that's trying to PsyOp us, really. So I'm just going to put this back up, and I'm going to say goodbye to everybody, and I hope that you bring some friends back into the PsyOp Recovery Room. And if anybody's interested in being part of the show, let me know, and we will get in touch with you.
One of the initial steps of the military PsyOp program is directed toward the hostland military establishment itself. Since the military represents the government to the populace, their actions and attitudes can do much to create a favorable image of that government in the minds of the people. A soldier's attitude goes a long way toward implementing an effective military PsyOp program. Among the support elements needed are the light mobile printing team with its printing and editorial shelters. Also needed is a radio team to support existing radio stations, particularly in the back country. An audiovisual vehicle will help to increase the effectiveness of face-to-face communications. And a loudspeaker team will support tactical operations.